The supply shuttle descended through the orange clouds of Korath Prime, and Daniel Carter watched the alien world grow larger through the viewport beside him. Feeling nothing but the familiar weight of another job waiting below, he had seen a dozen worlds like this one. Green and peaceful on the surface, but hiding something terrible in the shadows. And the desperate message from the Vellani colony had told him everything he needed to know about what waited for him down there. The shuttle touched down on a landing pad surrounded by tall, crystalline structures. And Daniel grabbed his worn duffel bag before stepping out into the warm alien air. Taking a moment to study the faces of the creatures who had hired him, the Vellani were tall and slender beings with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to hold permanent sadness. And the group waiting for him looked at Daniel, with obvious disappointment written across their features. "You are the human they sent?" asked the elderly Vellani, stepping forward, his robes marking him as someone important. "I am Supervisor Talon, and I must admit that I expected someone more impressive." Daniel stood only 6 feet tall with a lean build that carried old scars across his arms and face. And he understood why these aliens felt let down. Because compared to the warriors of other species, he looked like nothing special at all. "I get that a lot," Daniel said quietly, his voice calm and steady. "Why don't you show me where the attacks have been happening? And we can talk about your problem on the way, Supervisor." Talon exchanged uncertain glances with the other Vellani before nodding slowly and leading Daniel away from the landing pad. And as they walked through the colony called Green Hollow, Daniel noticed how empty the streets were and how every building had heavy shutters ready to slam closed at any moment. "It started 6 weeks ago," Talon explained as they walked. "A craftver came down from the northern mountains. And at first we thought it would move on after a few days, because these creatures usually stay away from settlements. But this one didn't move on," Daniel said. "And it was not a question. No, this one seemed to find us interesting. And it has been hunting us ever since, like we are nothing more than prey animals for its amusement." They reached a memorial wall covered in photographs and small offerings. And Daniel counted 17 faces looking back at him. 17 colonists who had died in the jaws of something that should not exist. "We hired hunters from 3 different species," Talon continued, his voice growing bitter. "The Korthans sent their finest tracker, who boasted about killing 100 dangerous beasts across the galaxy. And the Krathvor tore him apart on his first night in the forest." Daniel nodded slowly, studying the faces of the dead while his mind worked through the information he was gathering. "The Mendari sent 2 warriors in powered armor with plasma cannons that could cut through starship hulls," Talon said. "We found pieces of their armor scattered across half a kilometer of forest. And we never found their bodies at all. What about local security?" Daniel asked. "Our security forces have tried everything. And we have lost 4 officers in attempts to stop this creature. So now they only respond to attacks and never go looking for fights anymore." A young human woman approached them, her practical clothing marked with dirt from field work. And she studied Daniel with curious eyes that held neither fear nor disappointment. "You must be the specialist from Earth," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Miravos Agricultural Development, and I've been stuck here since the attacks started because no shuttles will land after dark anymore." Daniel shook her hand and noticed the calluses of someone used to hard work. "How long have you been working with the Vellani?" 3 years on different colonies, and I've learned that when they call for human help, it means things have gotten truly desperate." Talon made a sound that might have been offense or agreement, and Daniel couldn't tell which. The sun began setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and red. And Daniel watched the colonists hurrying to reach shelter before full darkness fell. "What exactly are we dealing with?" Daniel asked. "I've read the reports, but reports never tell the whole story." Talon pulled out a small device and projected an image into the air between them. And Daniel felt his breath catch slightly at what he saw. The Crothvor stood 12 feet tall on 6 powerful legs, its body covered in scales that shimmered like dark metal. And its head was a nightmare of teeth and tusks surrounding 3 glowing eyes that burned with predatory intelligence. It weighs approximately 2,000 kilograms, Talon said. Its claws can cut through reinforced steel, and its hide has proven resistant to plasma fire at close range. And it's smart, Myra added. Every time someone sets a trap, it learns and never falls for the same trick twice. Daniel studied the image for a long moment, committing every detail to memory while his mind began forming the first rough shapes of a plan. Where can I review the footage of its attacks? He asked it and blinked in surprise. You want to watch recordings? Should you not be preparing weapons or defenses? I need to understand what I'm hunting before I can figure out how to kill it. The supervisor led Daniel to a security building where screens lined the walls, showing feeds from cameras positioned around the colony. And a young human man sat at the controls, looking tired and scared. Kevin Brooks. The young man introduced himself. I maintain the sensor network, and I've got footage of every attack if you really want to see that stuff. Show me everything, Daniel said. Settling into a chair for the next 4 hours, Daniel watched recording after recording, seeing the Crothvor emerge from darkness with terrible speed and vanish again before anyone could react. And with each video, he noticed small details that others had missed. The creature always approached from downwind, where its scent would not give warning. And it never attacked the same sector twice in a row. And it always left one survivor to spread fear through the colony. This was not simple predation, Daniel realized. This was psychological warfare from a creature that understood terror as a weapon. Alarms suddenly blared through the building, and Kevin's screens lit up with motion alerts from the eastern perimeter. It's here. Someone screamed over the communications channel. The beast is here. Colonists ran past the windows heading for shelter, and Talon grabbed Daniel's arm with surprising strength. Come. We must get to safety before. No, Daniel said calmly, pulling free and walking toward the door. I need to see it for myself. He stepped outside into the darkness, ignoring the shouts behind him, and moved toward the sounds of chaos and terror coming from the colony's edge. They're in the shadows beyond the lights. Daniel saw the Crothvor for the first time, its 3 eyes glowing like embers as it watched the colonists flee. And for just a moment, those burning eyes turned toward him. The creature studied Daniel with obvious curiosity. This small, soft being who did not run. And something passed between predator and predator in that silent moment. Then the Crothvor turned and vanished into the forest, leaving behind 2 more bodies and a colony gripped by despair. Daniel stood alone in the darkness for a long time, watching where the creature had disappeared. And a small smile crossed his scarred face. Now I understand you, he whispered to the night. And now I know how you're going to die. 3 days passed after the attack, and Daniel Carter did nothing that looked like hunting to anyone watching him. He walked the perimeter of the colony each morning, stopping at random points to crouch down and examine the ground. And he spent his afternoons reviewing footage and asking questions that made no sense to the frightened colonists. He wants to know which direction the wind was blowing during each attack, Kevin told Myra as they watched Daniel work in the security center. What does wind have to do with fighting a monster? Myra shook her head but kept her doubts to herself, remembering the stories she had heard about human hunters back on Earth and how they approached problems differently than any other species in the galaxy. The Lonnie Council grew more frustrated with each passing hour, and on the 3rd day, they called a meeting to discuss whether they should send Daniel away and try to find someone else. He does nothing, shouted a council member named Vorath, his blue skin flushing darker with anger. Our people die while he sits and watches recordings like some kind of scientist instead of a warrior. Perhaps humans are not what the stories claim, another member agreed. Perhaps their reputation is exaggerated, and we have wasted our credits on a useless creature. Supervisor Tellon raised his hand for silence and turned to where Daniel sat quietly in the corner of the meeting room. What do you say to these accusations, human? Why have you not acted against the beast that kills our people? Daniel stood slowly, his calm demeanor unchanged by the angry words thrown at him. The hunters you hired before me were all warriors, correct? Strong and fast and brave, with the best weapons their species could provide? Yes, and they all died. They died because they treated the Krathver like an animal, Daniel said simply. They went into the forest expecting to find a beast driven by hunger and instinct. And instead they found something much more dangerous. The room fell silent as Daniel walked to the center where a holographic map of the territory glowed softly. Your creature is not just a predator, he continued. It is intelligent in ways that your previous hunters failed to understand. And it has been studying this colony just as carefully as I have been studying it. He pointed to locations on the map, marking each attack site with a gesture. It never attacks from upwind because it knows you might smell it coming. And it never strikes the same sector twice in a row because it understands patterns and knows you will prepare for what happened before. This is obvious. Vorath interrupted. We know it is clever. Do you know that it always leaves one survivor? Daniel asked, and the room went completely still. Every single attack, there is someone left alive to tell the others what they saw. And that is not an accident. Talon leaned forward with new interest in his dark eyes. What are you saying? I am saying that this creature does not just want to eat. Because if it only wanted food, it would hunt the wild animals in the forest, which are far easier prey than colonists behind walls. Daniel let that sink in before continuing. The Krathver wants something else from this colony. Something it gets from your fear and despair. And that is why it keeps coming back night after night. Mira spoke up from where she stood near the door. Are you saying it enjoys terrorizing us? I am saying it is an apex predator that has discovered a new kind of hunting, Daniel replied. And the previous hunters failed because they tried to chase it through terrain it knows better than anyone. Using tactics it has already learned to counter. Elder Sarth rose from her seat at the back of the room, her ancient face carved with grief from losing her entire family to the creature. Then, what will you do differently, human? What can you possibly do that the greatest warriors of 3 species could not? Daniel met her eyes without flinching from the pain he saw there. I am going to stop playing its game and make it play mine instead. He spent the rest of that day with Kevin, using the sensor network to map every location where the Krathver had been spotted over the past 6 weeks. And slowly a pattern emerged that no one else had noticed. It has a territory, Kevin said with surprise. A specific range it patrols around the northern forest. Everything has a territory, Daniel agreed. And somewhere in that territory is where it sleeps and where it feels safe. Myra joined them as the sun began to set, bringing food and water that Daniel barely touched. You really think you can find its den? I already have, Daniel said, pointing to a narrow box canyon on the map. This is the only location it has never been spotted near. And that means this is the one place it is protecting. So we send drones to bomb the canyon? Kevin asked hopefully. No, because it would survive and learn never to sleep there again. And we would lose our one advantage. Elder Soreth appeared in the doorway. Having followed them to the security center, you keep speaking of advantages and games. But I see no weapons and no army. So tell me, human, how exactly do you plan to kill something that has defeated every force sent against it? Daniel turned to face her fully, his scarred face showing neither arrogance nor doubt. I plan to use the one thing no other hunter has tried. The one thing that makes humans different from every other species in this galaxy. And what is that? Patience, Daniel said simply. The Krathver has never encountered a predator willing to wait, willing to study, willing to lose small battles in order to win the war. He pulled up a new display showing the creature's movement patterns over time. On my world, there is a type of hunting called persistence hunting, where humans would follow prey for days without rest until the animal simply collapsed from exhaustion. That sounds like madness, Sora said. That is how we survived on a world that tried to kill us every single day. And that is how I'm going to kill your monster. He looked around the room at the faces watching him, human and Vellani alike, but I cannot do it alone. So I need volunteers willing to trust me completely, even when my orders make no sense. What kind of volunteers? Mira asked. People who can move quietly and follow instructions without question. People who are not afraid to face this creature and look it in the eye without running. The room was silent for a long moment, and then Myra stepped forward. I'm in. Kevin swallowed hard but raised his hand as well. Me too. I guess. Elder Soreth watched them with something new in her ancient eyes. Something that might have been the first spark of hope she had felt in weeks. Perhaps I was wrong about humans, she said quietly. Perhaps you are exactly what the stories claim after all. Daniel nodded and began laying out his plan. And for the first time since the nightmare began, the people of Green Hollow started to believe they might survive. The hunting party gathered at the northern gate before dawn, and Daniel checked each member carefully before they entered the forest that had claimed so many lives. Mira carried a small pack with medical supplies and communication equipment. Her face set with determination, despite the fear Daniel could see hiding behind her eyes. And Kevin clutched a portable sensor unit that would help them track the creature's movements. A young Vellani named Ranger Kelleth had volunteered despite the objections of his family. His tracking skills too valuable to refuse, and he stood trembling slightly as he stared into the dark trees ahead. The final member of their group was Amy Sullivan, a shuttle pilot who had been stranded at the colony when the attacks began. Her military training making her calm and focused where others might panic. No vehicles, Daniel explained one final time. No plasma weapons, no loud equipment of any kind. Because sound travels far in this forest and our target has excellent hearing. Then how do we defend ourselves? Kelleth asked, his voice barely steady. We don't fight unless we have no choice, Daniel replied. Our job is not to kill the Krathver today. Our job is to make it want to kill us tomorrow in a place of our choosing. Amy nodded her understanding while the others exchanged uncertain glances. Trusting Daniel's plan, even though it sounded like madness, they moved into the forest as the first light of dawn touched the crystalline trees. And Daniel led them along paths that seemed random, but followed a careful pattern he had memorized from the sensor data. The forest of Karth Prime was beautiful in a dangerous way, with trees that grew in spiraling columns toward the sky and plants that glowed faintly with their own inner light. And everywhere there were signs of creatures that called this place home. Daniel stopped them frequently to examine tracks and broken branches, teaching the others to see what he saw in the small details that most people overlooked. Here, he said softly, pointing to a set of massive claw marks on a tree trunk. It passed through this area 2 nights ago, moving toward the colony. How can you possibly know that from scratches on a tree? Kevin whispered. The sap has partially hardened, but not fully sealed, which tells me the time. And the angle of the marks shows which direction it was traveling. Kelleth stared at Daniel with new respect. You hunt like the old masters of my people. Reading the forest like others read words on a screen. They continued deeper into the territory as the day grew brighter, and Daniel began leaving small signs of their passage that the creature would surely find. Broken twigs and footprints that told a story of confused prey wandering lost in the woods. We wanted to find our trail, he explained. We wanted to think we are easy targets, too stupid to hide our movements. By midday, they had reached the outer edge of the creature's core territory, and Daniel called for a rest near a stream where they could drink and refill their water containers. "Tonight we set the first bait," he said, sketching a rough map in the soft dirt beside the water. "We make camp here where it can see us, and we wait for it to investigate. You want us to sleep out here?" Mira asked, her voice tight with controlled fear. "I want the Krathfer to see us sleeping out here," Daniel corrected. "Whether we actually sleep is a different question." Amy studied the map with professional interest. "You're trying to draw it in close without triggering an attack, making it curious about why we're not afraid." "Exactly. Because every predator expects prey to run and hide. And when prey acts differently, it creates doubt and hesitation." They spent the afternoon preparing their campsite with care, making it look natural while hiding escape routes that only they would know about. And Daniel set up a series of noisemakers that would alert them to any approach as darkness fell over the forest. The team sat around a small fire that Daniel had insisted they light, knowing the creature would see the flame from miles away. "You're using us as bait," Callus said quietly, his large eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes," Daniel admitted without apology, "but I'm using myself as bait too. And I promise you that I have no intention of dying in this forest." Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the strange sounds of alien wildlife. And somewhere in the darkness, the Krathfor was surely watching them. Kevin's sensor unit beeped softly just past midnight, and he looked at Daniel with wide eyes. "It's here, approximately 200 meters to the north and approaching slowly." Daniel made no sudden movements, simply continuing to tend the fire as if nothing was wrong. "Everyone stay calm and keep doing what you were doing, because right now it's trying to understand us." Myra felt her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. But she forced herself to keep breathing and pretend she was not aware of the death. Waiting in the shadows, the sensor tracked the creature as it circled their camp, coming closer and then retreating, testing their reactions and finding none of the fear it expected. "Why isn't it attacking?" Amy whispered. "Because we're not acting like prey," Daniel replied, "and that confuses it. Makes it cautious when it should be confident." The Krathfor circled them for nearly 2 hours before finally retreating into the deeper forest. And only then did Daniel allow the others to relax. "That was the first step," he said. "Tonight we showed it something new. Something it has never seen before in all its years of hunting." "What did we show it?" Kelleth asked. "Prey that isn't afraid, and for a predator that has always relied on fear to control its victims. That is the most disturbing thing imaginable." They moved camps before dawn, leaving more false trails that suggested confusion and disorder. And the second night, they repeated the process in a new location closer to the Box Canyon. By the time the third day arrived, Daniel had driven the Krathfor exactly where he wanted it, backed into its den with nowhere left to run and an enemy it could not understand waiting outside. "Tomorrow we finish this," Daniel said as the team prepared for their final night in the forest. "Tomorrow we show that thing what a real apex predator looks like." He finally opened his worn duffel bag, and the others stared at the contents with disbelief, seeing no weapons or technology, but only a long hunting knife, climbing gear, and a length of thin cable that gleamed in the fading light. "That's it?" Kevin asked, his voice cracking. "That's what you're going to use against a 12-foot armored monster?" Daniel smiled his small, quiet smile and began checking each piece of equipment with practiced hands. "This is all I've ever needed." The Box Canyon stretched before them like the entrance to another world, its steep walls rising 50 meters on each side and its narrow floor covered in rocks and dead vegetation that had never seen sunlight. Daniel stood at the canyon's mouth as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. studying the shadows where the Krathver waited in its den, knowing that only one of them would leave this place alive. "You can't seriously be going in there alone," Myra said, her voice carrying an edge of desperation. "At least take a weapon. Something more than that knife and some cable." "Weapons would only slow me down," Daniel replied, checking the climbing gear strapped to his body. "And the creature has already proven it can survive plasma fire at close range." Amy positioned herself on the canyon rim with a clear view of the floor below, ready to provide whatever support she could from above. "I've got eyes on the entrance to its den. Looks like a cave about halfway back." Kevin was frantically running calculations on his portable unit, his face growing paler with each result. The odds of surviving a direct confrontation with that thing are less than 3%. And that's being generous. "Then I'll just have to be in the other 3%, Daniel said, with no trace of humor in his voice. Cleth gripped his tracking staff with shaking hands, wanting to offer help, but knowing his presence would only complicate what was about to happen. How can you be so calm when you're about to face something that has killed everyone who ever challenged it? Daniel paused at the canyon entrance and looked back at the young Villani. "I'm not calm. I'm terrified. But fear is just information telling me to be careful and pay attention." He walked into the canyon without looking back, his footsteps crunching softly on the dead plants that littered the ground. And the shadows seemed to grow darker around him with each step he took toward the waiting darkness. The team watched from above as Daniel reached the center of the canyon and stopped, standing perfectly still with his hands at his sides. And for a long moment, nothing happened, and the Krathver emerged from its den. And even from their elevated positions, the watching team felt their blood turn cold at the sight of it. The creature was even more terrible in person than any recording could capture. Its armored scales drinking in the light, and its 3 burning eyes fixed on the small human who dared to enter its home. And when it opened its mouth to roar, the sound shook the canyon walls. Daniel did not run, did not reach for his knife, did not show any sign of the terror that must have been screaming through every nerve in his body. The Krathver seemed confused by this, tilting its massive head to study the prey that refused to act like prey. And its 6 legs shifted uncertainly as it tried to understand what was happening. "What is he doing?" Kevin whispered, unable to look away from the scene below. "He's breaking its confidence," Amy replied, her military mind recognizing the tactic, even if she could barely believe what she was seeing. Every predator expects certain behaviors from prey, and when those expectations are violated, it creates hesitation. The Krathver lunged forward with shocking speed, its claws tearing through the air where Daniel had been standing just a fraction of a second before. And the human rolled to the side and came up running along the canyon wall. The chase that followed was the most terrifying thing any of them had ever witnessed, with the creature pursuing Daniel through the narrow space while its claws struck. Sparks from the stone walls and its roars echoed like thunder in the confined area. Daniel was fast for a human, but the Krathver was faster, and several times its claws came close enough to tear through his clothing and leave bloody lines across his back and arms. "He's going to die," Mira said, tears streaming down her face. "There's no way he can." "Watch," Amy interrupted, her eyes never leaving the battle below. Daniel was not simply running. He was leading the creature on a path through the canyon that forced it to navigate around obstacles and leap over rock formations. And each time it committed to an attack, he was already moving in a different direction. The Krathver grew frustrated, its movements becoming more aggressive and less controlled. And Daniel used that frustration against it by staying just barely out of reach. Minutes passed that felt like hours. And slowly something changed in the way the creature moved. Its lunges became shorter, its recovery time became longer, and its burning eyes began to show something that no prey had ever lived long enough to see before: exhaustion. It's getting tired. Keleth breathed, suddenly understanding what he was witnessing. He's actually wearing it down. Daniel had blood running from a dozen wounds, but he kept moving, kept dodging, kept forcing the Crathver to chase him through the canyon, while its massive body burned through energy reserves, meant for short explosive attacks rather than prolonged pursuits. The creature that had terrorized an entire colony, that had killed the greatest hunters in the sector, found itself facing something it had never encountered in all its years of dominance. Prey that absolutely refused to die. Finally, the Crathver stumbled, its legs shaking with exhaustion as it tried to corner Daniel against the canyon wall. And for the first time in the fight, Daniel stopped retreating. He climbed, scaling the rocky wall with speed that seemed impossible for someone so wounded. And the creature tried to follow, but its massive claws were designed for flat ground, not vertical surfaces. Daniel reached a ledge 20 meters up, just as the Crathver made one final desperate leap, its jaws snapping closed centimeters from his legs. And when the creature fell back to the canyon floor, Daniel dropped onto its back with his cable already wrapped around his hands. What followed was brutal and desperate and utterly primal, with Daniel wrapping the high tensile cable around the creature's throat while it thrashed and roared and tried to throw him off. Crathver slammed its body against the canyon walls, trying to crush Daniel against the stone. And twice he nearly lost his grip as the impact drove the air from his lungs. But he held on with a determination that went beyond survival, beyond courage, beyond anything the watching team could put into words. And slowly the cable tightened and the creature's roars became choked gasps. The Crathver collapsed to the canyon floor, its legs still twitching as the last of its air ran out. And Daniel kept the cable tight until long after the movement stopped. Then there was only silence, broken by the sound of Daniel's ragged breathing as he finally released his grip and slid off the massive corpse to land in a heap on the blood-stained ground. Keleth was the first to reach the canyon floor, scrambling down the walls with desperate speed. And he found Daniel sitting with his back against the dead creature's side, covered in blood from wounds too numerous to count. "Is it over?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Keleth looked at the monster that had killed his people, now nothing more than cooling meat, and then at the small human who had done what an entire galaxy had failed to do. "Yes," the young Vellani said, his voice filled with wonder. "It's over." Daniel nodded once and let his eyes close, trusting that the others would keep him alive long enough to see the sunrise he had earned. 1 week had passed since the death of the Crathver, and Daniel Cotter lay in the medical center of Green Hollow Colony while his body slowly healed from the wounds that should have killed him. The Vellani doctors had never treated a human before and were constantly amazed by how quickly his flesh knitted itself back together, calling their colleagues to observe what they described as an impossibly resilient species Mira visited every day, bringing food from the colony's kitchens that she insisted was better than a nutrient paste the medical staff provided. And she would sit with Daniel for hours talking about everything and nothing. "The colonists want to hold a celebration in your honor," she told him on the 5th day. "They're calling you the Beast Slayer and making up songs about what you did." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his bed, his bandaged torso protesting the movement. "I'm not a hero. I just did a job. You killed something that murdered 17 people and defeated every hunter sent against it," Myra replied. "If that's not heroic, then I don't know what is." Kevin came by later that afternoon with recordings from sensors he had placed around the canyon, footage that showed the entire battle from start to finish. And he was already planning to send copies to research institutions across the galaxy. "They need to study this," he said excitedly. "No one has ever documented persistence hunting against a creature this size. And the implications for xenobiology are incredible. Just make sure they edit out the parts where I was screaming in terror," Daniel said with a small smile. Elder Sorath arrived as the sun was setting, her ancient face softer than Daniel had ever seen it, and she carried a tray of food that she set beside his bed with careful hands. "I have come to apologize," she said, settling into the chair that Myra had occupied earlier. "When you first arrived, I thought you were weak and useless. Another failed hope that would die like all the others. You weren't entirely wrong," Daniel admitted. "By the standards of this galaxy, I am weak, physically speaking. No," Sora said firmly. "You are something far more dangerous than strong. You are relentless in ways that my people cannot understand." She reached out and took his hand, her blue fingers cool against his warm skin. "Tell me about your world. About the place that created beings like you." Daniel was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Earth is what the Galactic Council calls a Class 12 death world. A planet where nearly everything evolved to kill or be killed. Yet your species survived. More than survived. We became the dominant life form on the entire planet. Not because we were the biggest or strongest or fastest, but because we never gave up." Sorath listened as Daniel described a world of predators and poisons and natural disasters. A planet that tested its inhabitants every single day and killed those who could not adapt. "We learned to use our weaknesses as weapons," Daniel continued. "Our lack of claws made us invent tools. Our lack of speed made us invent endurance. And our lack of armor made us invent cunning. And fear?" Sorath asked. "You spoke of fear as information rather than weakness. Every creature feels fear. But humans learned long ago that running from fear only makes it stronger. So we taught ourselves to run toward the things that scared us most." Word of Daniel's victory spread across the sector in the days that followed, carried by communication networks to dozens of worlds where different species heard the story and struggled to believe out a single human, armed with nothing but primitive tools and impossible determination, had killed a creature that entire armies could not defeat. The Galactic Council received a formal report from their observers on Korath Prime, and the council chamber buzzed with conversation as representatives from 100 species tried to understand what the report meant. "This changes our understanding of the human species entirely," said a delegate from the Korthan Empire, the same species that had sent their finest tracker to die at the Krathver's claws. "We classified them as minor players in galactic affairs. But clearly, that assessment was wrong. They are still physically weak," argued a Mandari representative. "One lucky victory does not make them a threat." "It was not luck," said the human ambassador, a woman named Patricia Cole, who had been waiting patiently for her chance to speak. "What Daniel Carter did on Korath Prime is simply what humans do when we are pushed far enough." "And what exactly is that?" The council speaker asked. Patricia stood and looked around the chamber at the collected might of 100 civilizations. Beings who commanded fleets of ships and armies of soldiers and technologies beyond human understanding. "You sent warriors to fight a monster," she said calmly. "Beings raised from birth to kill and trained in the finest military academies your species could create." "Yes. And they all failed. They failed because they thought like warriors, expecting a fair fight where the stronger opponent wins," Patricia continued. "Humans don't think like warriors. Then what do you think like?" Patricia smiled, and something in that smile made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "We think like monsters, because that's what we had to become to survive our world." She let that sink in before continuing. "Daniel Carter didn't defeat the Krathver because he was stronger or faster. He defeated it because he was willing to suffer more, to endure more, to keep fighting long after any sane creature would have given up." "That sounds like madness." Someone said. "That sounds like evolution," Patricia replied. "Humans didn't claw our way to the top of our planet's food chain by being nice. We did it by being the most stubborn, vengeful, and determined species in existence on Korath Prime." Daniel finally left the medical center, and walked through the colony that he had saved, nodding to colonists who stopped to thank him and trying to avoid the children who followed him like a hero from their stories. Amy found him at the shuttle port, staring up at the orange sky with an expression that was hard to read. "I've got a transport heading to the outer rim. Room for one more if you're interested." "What's on the outer rim?" "A colony called New Haven has been having trouble with pirates, and they specifically requested a human consultant to help deal with the problem." Daniel considered this for a moment, thinking about the wounds that had barely healed and the nightmares that still woke him screaming in the darkness. Pirates sound easier than 12-foot armored monsters. Everything sounds easier than that. Amy agreed with a grin. They boarded the shuttle together as the colonists of Green Hollow gathered to watch. And Elder Soreth raised her hand in a gesture of blessing as the engines powered up. "Go with peace," she called out, "and know that you will always have a home among the Villani." Daniel raised his hand in return as the shuttle lifted off, carrying him toward whatever challenge waited next. And below him, the people he had saved returned to their lives with a new understanding of the galaxy they lived in somewhere, out there in the endless darkness of space. There were humans watching and waiting and refusing to die. And the galaxy would never be quite the same again.